Hello and welcome to the MIT Open Documentary Lab talk. I'm Sarah Wallison and I'm the director of the lab. And today I'm so pleased to introduce Brian Afande and Vincenzo Cavallo. Brian is the co-founder of Kenyan-based BlackRhino VR, a virtual reality production company with a desire to make Africa's unique experiences and cultural heritage accessible to everyone in the world through the power of VR. As an early African XR adopter, Brian envisions designing, democratizing, and demystifying what extended reality and new emerging technologies will look like and how they will impact communities. He believes that democratizing access to these technologies is a key ingredient to building awareness around the potential of what the youth in Africa can achieve. In his talk, Brian will discuss the status of the African XR ecosystem and the process behind international co-productions with projects such as the VR project, African Spacemakers. African Spacemakers is the first 360 interactive mockumentary ever made in Africa, and the first time that a Kenyan virtual reality film was selected at the Venice Festival, an historical moment for African creativity. Next, Vincenzo will present. Vincenzo is the CEO of Cultural Video Production, co-founder of the NRB Bus Collective, and a postdoctoral affiliate at Oxford University's Program in Comparative Media Law and Policy. Vincenzo is also an author who writes, directs, and experiments with different formats, and a media entrepreneur that tries to develop new sustainable business models to support the production of stories that are socially, culturally, politically, and artistically relevant. Vincenzo will address cultural and political issues, including how and why psychogeography has unconsciously been used by XR urban storytellers. He will also discuss some of the preliminary findings emerging from a series of interviews conducted with MIT Open Doc Lab researcher Andrea Kim, exploring the use of 360 videos by African XR artists to address topics such as space occupation in Johannesburg, space division in Lagos, and space making in Nairobi. Please remember to put your questions in the Q&A. And without further ado, I hand it over to Brian. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the, excuse me. Thank you so much for the introduction, Sarah. Just to, you know, it's customary for me to, my tradition actually tells me whenever someone introduces you, you also need to tell them something that they don't know about you. So I just wanted to say that you can also call me Mr. French because I used to be a DJ. So when you come to Nairobi and you say Brian from BlackRhino, chances are people would know me. But then if you say Mr. French, more people know me based on that. So I'm really happy and honored to be here. I'm a proud and happy husband and father to two boys, Enzi and Jabari. And one of the things that I'm currently doing is that maybe actually let me share my screen. Just hold on. Yeah, so yeah, that's just about me. I'm also sitting in the World Economic Global Future Council, the VR and AR. And it's amazing to see and to work with a lot of individuals who are passionate about XR in the world. There's a project that we're currently working on, and it's the African XR report with a bunch of amazing human beings here in Africa. And I feel like this is a precursor to what's going to be, you know, outlined in the report. So I feel honored to share also some of the, you know, initial findings of just working within the XR space in Africa and understanding the different nuances and dynamics that really exist here. Just a background, as BlackRhino VR, we started out our business back in 2015 we've been serving a plethora of clients ranging from, you know, working extensively within the African continent and also in Europe and the States. So we started out as a 360 studio, but over the years, we've really looked at this as a dream. Being an early adopter, especially with someone who, you know, it's self-taught. So being an early adopter allows us to also see ways on how we can be able to give back to the community and build sort of, you know, value that will circulate in the economy, create pathways on how people can depend on XR. When we set it up, like Sarah had mentioned, our vision is really about the 3Ds, which is to democratize the technology, to demystify, and to deploy it. One of the things that I'm really, really passionate about is to just equip the young person. You know, I'm turning 40 years old this year, and unfortunately in Kenya, I'm not considered as a youth person. And one of the things that really influences me is the fact that we want to give the youth an opportunity to really be the XR innovators and inventors of the future. And we do this, I'll explain in terms of some of the outreach programs that we do and have. As I mentioned, this gift we have of XR is really based upon and underpinned on the fact that we know that a lot of value can be drawn and pivoted with the technology itself. And please forgive me for saying this statement, but sometimes I feel that technology, especially digital technology, has a very colonial approach. And there are some disparities that exist with, you know, with this digital technology. I feel sometimes the West create the technology and impose it to, you know, to what we call, for lack of a better geopolitical term, the global South. And they say, okay, guys, here's a technology, you can use it. Some of this technology wasn't really created from an Afrocentric design perspective. So it's upon us as Africans to also own the space in terms of our natural iterations to the technology, in terms of also some of the problems that we have. How are we going to use these technologies, from understanding the fundamental principles of the technologies? How are we going to be able to come up with solutions that we can also one day export to the West? So there's a disparity, like I said, looking at technology. And one of the disparity is the role of women in tech, not just in the, you know, not just in Europe or the States or around the world. I was lucky enough one day to have traveled to the States for one of the biggest VR conferences, the Oculus Connect. And it was just shocking for me to see that, you know, there's a huge gap of women playing part in tech, because we had around maybe 7,000 men and maybe around 500, 600 women. And for me as a protagonist, as a pioneer, especially in Africa, I have an onus and responsibility to make sure some of these disparities, especially when it comes to giving opportunities to women, are addressed. So we started out what we call a VR Training Center, which is the Moran Story Lab, which is geared towards empowering women in the field of journalism. Anyone from film-based ecosystems, we bring them in. It's a free curriculum that we take them through. We've combined it with also a Google curriculum. But then at the end of the experience, the women actually start creating their own immersive content, because there's a deficiency of that. Another project that we do, one of our outreach programs, is called State of the Art. And I believe when you look at art, I think art is, and I was speaking to Andrea some time ago, and I feel like, you know, art is collective repository of, you know, the memories of a society. And it's very, very vital and important for us to empower artists, especially when it comes to nascent technology, so that they can be able to understand how to start creating immersive art and tools and utilities on how they can start creating different iterations based on their interaction with the technology. So we started State of the Art, which is just about deploying XR technologies and empowering artists. So there's a curriculum that we've built, and we take artists through this whole curriculum. Another project is XR Without Borders, which is, I think, our dream to the world. And XR Without Borders really is, we have a vision of transforming children's lives and the underserved and underrepresented groups in Africa in general through XR. And this is an outer call to each and every one of you. If you have time on your hands, feel free to join XR Without Borders, because what happens is you might not be able to give to give back in terms of monetary value, but you have time and you're able to, you know, put your time in interdisciplinary teams to come up with some of the solutions that I'm talking about. So as long as you have time on your hand or resources, we can of course work under the Exile Without Borders and help some of these people transform their lives through the technology itself. Now, when I'm talking, I think sometimes I have a gift and a curse, because the gift is I look at technology from the lens of a storyteller, even though I understand the fundamentals of the technology. But then sometimes I'm very, you know, I look at it from this really thin lens. And when I heard that I was coming to speak at the Open Lab, I thought about, you know, coming up with a theme around the XR ecosystem. But this theme is focused around the stories that are happening in Africa. Because what's happening right now, you have people working in solitude in different silos. When you look at the whole map of Africa, you have XR communities and ecosystems working in North Africa, South Africa, East Africa, but they're all working in silos. So it's our vision and mission each and every day when we wake up to try to bring these silos together and start coming up with, you know, different content solutions and experiences based on XR. So our formula is actually based on the 3 C's, which is collaboration, co-creation, and then thereafter building a community. When we're trying to come up with all this, you know, trying to create a framework on how people can collaborate, there are certain challenges that we've been able to experience and also very clear opportunities that we can take advantage of. It's important to understand, and I want to give you an example for what happened in Kenya. I don't know about you guys, but there's something called M-Pesa, which is our mobile money that has really revolutionized the way people transact with money. Not just Kenyans, but also it's a platform that also has been able to be exported around the world. So it's mobile money. So believe it or not, when Kenyans, we started transacting with mobile money, we had a technology anxiety where people thought that the money would disappear in thin air. So what is this digital currency? How does it work? So in that case, just fast forward to what VR is. This head-mounted display looks very foreign. It looks intimidating. So there's a form of technology anxiety that we've faced as a challenge. And the idea for us is to shift those mindsets into understanding that, yes, we need to build trust in the technology, but it's the solutions we come up with that also build trust in the technology. And one of the things that we're using to build trust in the technology, of course, is a mobile phone, because a lot of people trust mobile phones right now. So these are platforms that we're building. And that goes to my second point about some of the challenges we are going through. Access to hardware and software. These are bottlenecks that we've experienced, of course, and as young entrepreneurs, I think we've been able to circumvent around some of these issues. But still, when you look at the majority of individuals, access to hardware is not only expensive, it costs you the shipping cost, the logistics is a nightmare to bring some of this equipment. And of course, when you're talking about the hardware and software, connectivity is a big issue. How are we connected? How do we leverage platforms that are going to be built on, that are going to pivot on internet and connectivity that would allow some form of democratization? It's very important for us to realize that a lot of people in Africa actually use their mobile phones as a form to access internet. So we still have issues that are, you know, we are having talks with government to see how best, you know, we can create some form of public-private sort of partnerships that will allow the cost of data to be low. Even though when you compare Kenya to the rest of the African countries, we have a really low data cost, but still it's an impending factor. Of course, deficiency of specific skill sets and expertise is a huge issue. You know, I know I'm speaking to individuals who've gone to, you know, like organized institutions of higher learning, but I want to tell you the truth. I personally graduated from the prestigious school of YouTube. I actually read my way through. For the past 6 years, I've been reading myself through understanding fundamental principles of AR, VR, mixed reality. How do you apply this technology? But I'm one of the few people who can be able to understand this and build a business model out of it. So there's a deficiency of skills and expertise, because what happens is you'll find the people that you want to train, especially the young people. But then what happens is you train these people, and then other bigger companies come and poach them, which is, it's an opportunity for them. But at the end of the day, we lose this talent based on the fact that, you know, people have been, there's some form of brain drain. Of course, democratized distribution of platforms. We still need some funding opportunities so that people can be able to, you know, scale their businesses. There's businesses that come on different levels. We've been able to see Exile companies from startup levels to growth levels, and these people require funding. I'm yet to see a fund that is designated towards an African XR fund that is going to really support growth from the ground up. Of course, the government, at the end of the day, it's about checks and balances with them. It's about a balance sheet. If the government doesn't see any value in the economy for it, they will not support it. But of course, you know, we're still trying to have conversation with the government for them to understand that we are here and we are also creating value, not just in economical value, but also social and cultural value. And it's my sincere hope that with time that this situation will improve. Opportunities that exist out there, according to my experiences, you know, there's a global demand of individuals with these skill sets, like I mentioned. But the problem is, like I said, there's some form of brain drain when it comes to this expertise, and they are going abroad to work for different companies. But I believe there's some form of skill gap that is being bridged, because we have individuals who've worked abroad and they bring those specific skill sets to Kenya to just really improve different pipelines and the technology in general. It's also one of the opportunities we've seen is XR is still considered highly nascent technology. And there's opportunity for us, especially with people like us as the protagonists, to build this narrative from the ground up according to the future we want to see. So there's a huge opportunity for us to actually build this on a clean slate. And this is exactly what's happening with the stories across silos, where you have a lot of people collaborating on projects because we're building the future that we want to see. Of course, there's collaboration opportunities and certain grants that are supporting co-production agreements. You know, you have the British Council, the Goethe Institute, and the European Union coming in with grants that are supporting some sense of, you know, diversity and inclusivity. And a lot of people are reaching to Africans to create some form of partnerships and collaborations. But then when I speak about African space makers, you'll realize that these co-productions also require some form of framework, legal framework or entity that will really govern how these co-production agreements work. And there's really a deficiency of frameworks and benchmarks that people can use to govern some of these co-production agreements. But I'll talk about that when I'm speaking about the African space makers. You know, regionally, we've been able to also partner with a lot of people. I see a lot of collaborations. Example on Lelak is one of the experiences that we shot with Electric South, based in South Africa. And of course, Oculus VR for Good was a project that, you know, brought together filmmakers from Los Angeles, Kenyan filmmakers, Oculus and Facebook on the same production. And it was amazing just to use, number one, state-of-the-art equipment. There's a lot of skills transference. There's a lot of cultural exchange that went through the whole process. So I'm happy to see that regionally and international, there's some co-productions that are happening, and people are helping instigate this from their own resources because of the vision of working together. When I speak about African space makers, you know, Sarah had mentioned the project. This is a project that we worked with my really good friend Vincenzo. But I feel it's important for me to say this, that this project was actually a PhD on its own when we went through the whole process. It was a very unique collaborative project where we worked with InVR, which is a renowned VR company based in Berlin. Of course, my brother Vincenzo running the Nairobi bus, and BlackRhino. So we collaborated, and this is like what Sarah had said. It's an award-winning interactive series highlighting the importance of the creative class culture and also just the creative economy in general. Now, this project was the ideal opportunity for us to actually have a knowledge and cultural exchange platform where InVR were actually coming on board to understand how local companies are able to create content and understand different dynamics, on-ground dynamics, especially when it comes to deploying the technology from a very difficult execution level. On the flip side, we also learned technical skill sets and capabilities on how to improve our production pipeline. And what happened as a result of this is there's an ecosystem that developed out of this, because InVR showcased some of their capabilities, and in turn, we took this information and channeled it back to the ecosystem just to see people create solutions out of what they've learned from, you know, just working with international companies. For me, this is the win itself, because I personally think the technology is, XR technology is about changing mindsets, having a growth mindset and understanding that this technology can change a lot of things in different dimensions. There's an economical dimension. You know, when I look at my business model is actually a unique model because it's based on a 70-30 sort of scenario, whereby 70% of what we do is projects that are, you know, highly commercial projects that we in turn plow back 30% of what we do into the outreach programs. And when we look at something like African Space Makers, this was the ideal project for us to come in on board, not because there was some form of you know, economical benefits to it, but there was the idea that we would learn a lot from working with interdisciplinary teams. Now, when I was talking about one of the issues that, you know, people go through, especially when you're having some form of co-production agreements, is the fact that there are no bilateral co-production agreements that exist between Kenya and other companies. And this is a challenge to each and every person actually listening to this webinar, because it's important for you to think that, you know, the change can actually start with you as individuals. It doesn't need to be the American government in general that are going to support some of these co-production agreements. Also, MIT on its own can say, we want to support and we want to partner, co-create and collaborate with Africans. So we're going to create some form of bilateral agreement with Kenyans just to foster some sense of growth. And when you look at these bilateral agreements, like I mentioned, there's certain frameworks that allow us to work cohesively together. And when you look at these frameworks, they don't really exist. There's no benchmarks that would allow us to start creating you know, legal frameworks around these co-production agreements. How do we start engaging? There's rights, there's intellectual property. How do we start addressing intellectual property when you're working with different partners? There's moral rights, there's creative rights, there's economical rights. Where do those rights sit? What is the form of revenue share when it comes to distribution? So still, these are gray areas that need to be focused, need to be addressed, and the discourse has to start now, because fortunately, we're one of the few people who are having such rich conversations, but it's for us to actually think about how are we able to create you know, some form of relevance? How are we going to create some form of value in a larger ecosystem of players and practitioners? So this is why I say African Space Makers for me was actually a PhD. And I believe my team and other people who are also in touch with, you know, the team that came to Nairobi to shoot, and also just understanding how distribution works on a whole new level. Because right now there's a fact that there's distributors who want, of course, to showcase the product. We're discussing about adaptation rights, who's going to be creating the adaptation, what's going to happen to different territories. So there's a lot of information that is actually being passed to a larger community based on the fact that Vincenzo's dream of putting together a proposal that was funded by the Culture at Work Fund came into reality. Vincenzo received this money because we put in a joint proposal. And after we got the grant, we decided to work on this. But then Vincenzo met these guys from Berlin, guys from InVR in Berlin. And we decided to all work together based on the fact that we at least had a cushioning for each and every person working on the project. So I believe that we'll get into a Q&A. There's a lot to be discussed, but then, you know, I also feel like 20 minutes is not enough time for me to actually condense a lot of this information. I've really tried to, you know, try to structure the conversation based on the fact that, you know, there's a lot of information that still needs to be captured. So I'd like to say, and I call Vincenzo my brother because I really respect this individual. And I think we've been able to travel together to Burkina Faso and work on different projects together. And me and Vincenzo is really like, we go hand in hand, like regrets and hangovers. So without any further ado, I just like to welcome my brother Vincenzo, who's going to talk more about, not just the African space makers, but looking at the larger picture of the projects. Asante sana. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I'm gonna try to share my screen as well as I worked on a presentation. There we go. So a lot has been said about the ecosystem, which was really the big expertise of Brian, who is a very important character and player in Kenya and in the whole Africa, and a very respected person, especially by me and my team as well. Just a very quick presentation. I arrived in Kenya in 2007 to work on my PhD thesis, and I received a fellowship. And here I am, after 15 years, I never left, because I have created a production company called Cultural Video Production. And then I bought an incredible piece of metal that is nowadays called the NRB bus. So, as I said, this was the title of my PhD thesis when I came. It was the E-Participation Ecologies of Kenya. It was about participatory democracy and new media in Kenya. And right after, or actually during the process of working on my PhD, I shoot 2 film documentaries. One is called Maskani Flani, and the other one is called Twende Berlin. Maskani Flani was an exploration of what does it mean public space or community space in Kenya. Maskani, it's a Swahili word that is used to express a very specific type of public space. Twende Berlin is the sequel. With the same group that created Maskani Flani, we flew all the way to Berlin and we made a musical documentary about gentrification, seen from the point of view of a group of Kenyan artists. So again, a lot of international awards. We were kind of successful. We kept going on with other feature films, blah, blah, blah. And we also have our outreach programs. This is the bus inside upstairs. And we do teach photography, urban photography in specific. We teach videography. This is Mr. Ishijuka, one of the representative of Canon who came all the way from Japan to see our double-decker bus. These are the types of workshop tours that we do around Kenya. So you see, one of the things we are really keen about is urban photography, urban landscape photography. And, you know, as we progressed, we ended up into VR. We ended up into VR for a very specific reason. When I met for the first time Brian, I told him, see, it's been years I've been thinking about making this series about space making, because I'm really interested about how people are creating creative space that are conducive for the creative economy. And in a city like Nairobi, these spaces are really important because of the absence of organized public space, of the absence of a policy to support the creative sector. So it was a natural journey that led us into this idea of African space makers. But I don't want to talk just about myself. I want to talk about something bigger. And what happened is, while I'm working on African space makers, and I'm in the process of finishing this interactive story, I look around in festivals and I just find out there is a film coming out from Johannesburg called Adzibuye. Adzibuye means in Zulu occupation. And there is another film coming out from Lagos called Lagos at Large. Again, it's a film about a city. It's a film about space. And I'm thinking in my hand, how is it possible? How is it possible that on the continent, at the same time, 3 different people are working on very similar concept? And when I met Andrea Kim, who is one of the researchers at MIT, I started to talk to her about this. And I said, like, you know, I have in mind to write a paper, an article that is trying to find out the reason why we were all doing the same things in the continent. And I approached this paper in different ways. We interviewed the people, but at a certain point, I took a whole book from my university, and then I started to look at it, and then I was like, there is something about psychogeography that we have been unconsciously used to make these stories. Now, just to give a very brief definition, because in the time we don't have time to go into psychogeography and the society of the spectre, but just a few definitions. There is a group of artists and intellectuals in the 50s in France, just a few years before the big social movements are starting to take over the squares. And these guys call themselves the Situationist International, and are guided by a guy called Guy Debord. What they say is basically, we need to create situation. We need to create situation to break into the monotony and into the routine of the spectacle. So for them, creating situation means to break with the system, create a situation in which you start to think about the system you live in, start to think about the unthinkable. They are basically the guys who invented the flash mob. They are the guys who basically invented what street artists call prank, or like when you do something called rerouting. You're using a message of the capitalist system against itself, no? Like, for example, capitalism kill on the cigarettes instead of smoking kill, just to give you an example. But the most important thing for us is this psychogeography concept that they invent. And psychogeography is a practice that is based on the idea of the dérive, which means the drift. When you basically go out in the city, maybe where you come from, and you decide to let the emotion guide yourself instead of having a specific route that you have to follow. You know, every day we wake up, we go to work, we go to pick up our children in school, we go for shopping. In this sense, the situationists are saying, break with your routine and just go out in your own city and let yourself be driven by emotion. Why should you do that? The reason why you should do that is because you have to look at cities in a different way. Cities shall not be built according to them for functions. Therefore, there should be a strong critique against functional urbanism and advocate for unitary urbanism, which means we bring inside the concept of urbanism psychology, art, politics, everything that is important. And you see this map on the left that is shown in this presentation is the map that the situationists in the 50s created based on the fact that they went out, let themselves guide by emotions. They took the map of Paris, they cut it and paste, they put it together, and it became the map of their emotions and their tour into Paris. So I think that there is a concept of psychogeography embedded in what we have done without knowing it in different cities in Africa. In this case, Johannesburg, Lagos, and Nairobi. Now, how do we declinate this concept of psychogeography into our society. Because when the board wrote the Society of the Spectacle, artificial intelligence was not yet there. But if you read that book, and it's crazy because I read it just yesterday, because funny enough, I brought it to me from Italy a long time ago, and it stayed here. And you read what he wrote and you think, like, how is possible this guy wrote these things before social media emerged, before artificial intelligence emerged? Anyway, the society, in the Society of the spectacle is the way we relate to each other. So according to the board, we are not anymore doing things in the reality. So our relationships are always mediated by something. And this created degradation. And he uses the word colonization of social life. Now you tell me if in the age of social media, this doesn't sound kind of prophetic. Himself says, I'm really sorry about the fact that everything I said is actually occurring. So for me now, the thing is, how do we declinate the concept of the Society of the Spectacle? Because behind the Society of the Spectacle, there were human beings. There was the idea that the material things, the consumerism was everything, and the appearance was everything, but still it was run by human beings. Now the Society of the Spectacle, it's not run by human beings anymore. It's co-run with the artificial intelligence, and sooner or later there's going to be a transition in which the artificial intelligence will take over the spectacle. So what's the role of the situationism? What's the role of psychogeography in a world in which we are in the post-humanity? So I just made an exercise in the sense that I thought, how would it be a manifesto of artists and intellectuals today who come together and decide to be post-digital situationists? And I think in the manifesto, the first thing would be that as a situationist nowadays, we should be using immersive technologies. And why I'm so keen about immersive technologies? Because I think the difference between immersive technologies and other technology is that you are completely immersed into it, and you can do something that is completely the opposite of other technologies other technologies are doing, which is not to connect, but to disconnect. So assuming that we are using immersive technology to disconnect human beings from what is the spectacle or what is the mainstream spectacle, and we can immerse themselves into another reality. And that reality is per se the situation, the flash mob, the thing that breaks with the routine and then makes you think. And in that moment in which we bring the subject into an immersive experience, what we do, exactly the opposite of what people and designers do today. We don't create a video game in which you have to reach an objective. No, we do the opposite. We create an experience in which you can be driven by your own emotion, like the situationists were thinking. I don't know if my connection is okay because, okay. So anyway, our ultimate goal, just like the situationist, is to make people think about the reality they live in and to become critical so that they can take over their own reality and have a better life. They can stop what it's called the degradation of life by Guy Debord. This also needs to address artificial intelligence because, for example, applications like Google Maps are exactly the opposite of psychogeography. So how can we try to bring the idea of humanism into the post-human? How can we make the algorithm more human? Or like Gerd Leonard says, how can we transform the algorithm in androrithm? So I think we need to bring this mentality of the situationist inside the post-human. And this could be our manifesto. Again, these 3 films, again, 3 stories. So I started to interview with Andrea Kim the people behind these stories. Let's start with Adzibuye. Here is Dylan Valley, a fantastic guy. I had the opportunity to talk to him at least, I think, for a couple of hours. And he tells me, listen, I was thinking about making a film about Uber taxi drivers and digital exploitation. And then I had the opportunity to get into into this workshop with Let Sound. And I thought, hey, let me actually do that story at Zibuye about the occupation. Even though that story has been told already by many people, I want to tell it in 360 because I know I can add something by telling that story in 360. The story in a nutshell is about a creative collective that takes over a house and occupies it. So it's a critique against the private property, right? And what Dylan tells me is by actually working on this project, my mentality, my view, my perspective shift completely. I started really to focus about space, ownership, capitalism, and he goes deep into the story until he creates a situation which is incredible. And you are inside the house, and at a certain point you hear the owner of the house speaking at the phone. You don't see him, you are inside the house. The owner of the house is speaking on the phone. In that moment, you understand 2 things. Number 1, the owner of the house is black, is not a white person. This already generated an internal conflict between the people who did the occupation. Some left because they thought it was about post-apartheid. Some stayed because they said, it doesn't matter if the owner is black or white. We are actually criticizing the system that is behind everything. And then you hear this voice and you are inside his house and you feel incredibly uncomfortable. So he's really a situationist, a post-human situationist who creates a story that breaks with the spectacle and makes you think about the capitalist system. How? By approaching the space and by questioning the unquestionable, and also by criticizing functional urbanism and advocating for unitary urbanism. Everything is about emotion in this place, although we are talking about private property, right? Let's talk about Jumoke and Lagos at large. Similar story. Jumoke is thinking about making a film about Biafra. Then she starts working with Electric South. She gets into the workshop. She thinks like, hey, why don't I make a film about Lagos? Because the 360 allows me actually to represent the city in a way that I could not do before. And up to now, it's something quite logical. But what made me really think about her approach is she decided to use someone not that was born and raised in Lagos to tell this story, but someone that comes from the diaspora. So someone who is half Nigerian, half Austrian. I said, Jumoke, why? I mean, why you didn't use, I don't know, the guy who is from the market or someone or a famous poet from Lagos? She said, I wanted to get a romantic approach to Lagos. I wanted to have someone that looks at Lagos as a somehow wonderland. What Jumoke is doing is bringing in back the concept of psychogeography of drifting. Because this person that she brings in, this diaspora poet, is drifting around the city. She's going around without an objective. She's looking around with a very romantic view, which is also, you know, what the whole idea of psychogeography that is based on the way Baudelaire was looking at Paris. He was the flavor, I'm not fluent in French, but basically the people who go around the city without an objective. And that's already super interesting. What is even more interesting, she also has her own trick. She wants to address the issue of spatial division. She says, in the mainland, there are the poor people. In the island, there are the rich people. Before it was the white colonialists, now it's the black elite. I'm going to take the people and put them in the space where they cannot be. So she creates a system of, she overlays images of spaces and places in these spaces subjects. So on the public beach, in the squares. So this is also super psychogeography approach, super situationist. She's using the rerouting. Yeah, she's using the idea of the same approach of the street artist, right? Finally, this is myself at Venice Biennale when I met for the first time Andrea, and she interviews me. And then with African space makers, I think we brought this thing of drifting up to another level, because we actually included, we introduced also the issue of interactivity. And our interactivity in African Space Maker, it's not about, winning an award or passing to the next level. It's completely about drifting. The approach is completely playful. We also use the overlay approach. For example, we took a collective of fashion designers from the slum who are using recycled material and who are inspired by the aesthetic of the chokora, who are the people that are taking the trash from the street, the people who are always dirty, the last in the class society system. And we bring them inside like a very shining mall, just to give you an idea. But we also do a lot of other psychogeographic things. I think the time is almost over, so I need to go fast. When I asked Jumoke, why do you think that, why this coincidence? She answered to me, do you believe in juju? And I said, yes, of course. Now, the conclusion is, I think there is space for starting a new platform, a new discussion, a new research and development to understand how new application of psychogeography, the practice of psychogeography, can be used in immersive and urban storytelling. So my dream is maybe that this talk will give the birth to the new immersive Situationist International. That could be a new movement made of artists and intellectuals. Ultimately, what I want to do, what I always wanted to do in my life, was to challenge the capitalist system, not necessarily to subvert it, but to improve the quality of our life. And I think by tackling into the issue of public space, playful commons, we can really make our life better and very fast, because the impact of working on public spaces is almost immediate, and you can see the result, as the 3 films have shown. Thank you so much for your attention, and I think we are ready now for the Q&A.
Yes, thank you so much, Vincenzo and Brian. That was a fantastic talk, and it's so wonderful to see, Brian, how much you're doing to build the XR community in Africa, and Vincenzo, this idea of VR and using it to break with spectacle and break with people's reality so they can be critical and reimagine it. And that's very exciting. I'm sure we have questions. I know Andrea has a question for you, so we'll start there.
Thank you so much, Brian and Vincenzo. I just wanted to say that when I first saw African Space Makers, so it's a 15-minute interactive VR piece, and I've never spent that much time in VR, but I found that with this piece, I did, because it was truly, truly incredible how the story unfolded, involving 5 different art collectives showing their space, the way you co-created with everyone at such a scale, and how they told their own stories in this like Afro-punk mockumentary style. I found that really immersive and creative and fun. And in a way, that is really what broke the spectacle of VR for me and connected me to the real, as you said in your presentation, Vincenzo. So could you speak a bit more about the production process of the African Space Makers and the different creative collectives that you worked with?
Thank you, Andrea, for the compliments. And, you know, you really made my day when I saw your post for the first time after you watch African Space Maker. And we did not even know each other by then. It made me feel like we did something relevant, Brian. And you know, after all we went through. So the process of co-creation is this. A lot of these people we work with are friends. I repeat myself, I've been 15 years in Nairobi and working on the issue of public space and commons since basically 2008 and political participation. So like, these are all Afro-punk people doing their own crazy thing around the city. And I would go there with also some people from BlackRhino, which were like, you know, I remember some of the guys of BlackRhino were like really questioning my professionality because I'm a bit out of, you know, this commercial world. But I think we learn together, isn't it? I learned from you guys, you learned from me as well, that sometimes to be playful also brings a lot of good things. So I would go there and I would say, guys, we need to make a story that represents you. Now, to make a story that represents you, we cannot just tell your story. You cannot just tell me A, B, C. We need to go straight into the emotion, the spirit, the Weltanschauung. What's going on here? You know, like how would you make this unveil in a powerful way, in a spectacle way? And you know, we would just drifting. We will spend like a couple of days just I mean, I'm not going to go in details, but like basically just losing time together and writing. And then I would come back and I will read the script with them. Then they would say like, yes, this is cool. This is really represent us, or maybe no, this doesn't represent us very well. Let's change this in this way and this way. And then they, you know, they would be reenacting themselves in a very cathartic way, because like, for Masai and Billy to go and do their parade inside the mall, it was really like, it was not, for us, it was not like, oh, wow, we are in the mall. No, it was like, yeah, let's go to take the piece out of the people who go to the mall on Saturday and show them that we want to sell them the same clothes that the people that go and collecting things from the street are wearing. And it was like this for all the stories, just giving you an example. So when you say punk, again, when I went to study the history of the Situationists are the people who set the cultural and the technique that the punk movement actually implements after. The idea that you know, you have to play with everything that is a message of capitalist and subvert it, like the song of Sid Vicious, God Save the Queen. You know, it's at the base of African Space Makers, because it's a situationist, situationist piece.
Thank you, Vincenzo. It looks like we have a question from Dylan Valley. He says, great talk, everyone. How do we get over the stumbling blocks of distributing and exhibiting in Africa and the scarcity of headsets, for example?
I think this is a question for Mr. Afande.
Vincenzo, you know, you've become such a VR expert. I think you should take that question. But anyway, let me also acknowledge the presence of Dylan Valley, who created Azibuye, and he's a really good friend of ours, and I'm very happy that he was good on Vincenzo, and I'm very happy that he was able to join this conversation. Thank you so much for your question, Dylan. I think when it comes to, you know, distributing and, you know, trying to find a way on how we can get head-mounted display units on people's hands is really a multifaceted approach. that number one requires one, for as much as it's difficult working with government, it's very important for government to see that this is still nascent technology and they want to create it and foster the growth. So if they can have incentives whereby I can be able to ship in, you know, at one point in Kenya, and Vincenzo, I stand corrected, at one point in Kenya, there was no taxes on cameras, no, and computers. You had to get a special, not license, but authorization, but you wouldn't pay duty on that. You know, we're paying a very heavy duty on VR infrastructure. I'm talking about hardware and stuff, and also software is not subsidized. You know, from looking at it from a government perspective in terms of just trying to find ways on how they can open up the borders, create new logistical pathways for us to be able to ship in the gears. And also the price that will definitely go on retail or enterprise is going to be down if we are also going to get some form of subsidized rates from, you know, the suppliers and the manufacturers in the West. But I think, Dylan, the biggest challenge we have is, and this is, I go back to what I was talking about, I feel sometimes you're playing second fiddle when it comes to VR, especially as Africans. And let me explain this. When you look at when Oculus created a VR headset that was using the mobile phone, they actually discontinued this headset. And when John Carmack, at that time, the CEO of Oculus, said this was a missed opportunity. And the reason why it's a missed opportunity is because when you're looking at the mobile phone and the price point for the mobile phone, vis-a-vis compared to the VR experiences that you're going to experience as a 3DOF system, the mobile phone can still give you high fidelity experiences. But when they killed the one platform that would allow people to leverage on the mobile phone and content, what happened? Africans, especially people like us, decided, because Oculus has already killed the 3DOF headset and they're moving to a 6DOF, what do I do? Because I'm running also a highly commercial business, I want to get the latest VR headset. Now, on this flip side, Dylan, what we should be doing is building our own platforms that would allow some form of mass adoption on mobile phones so that we are not playing second fiddle. This technology, the infrastructure, was not created from an Afrocentric design perspective. It was created for the West because they already have infrastructure that supports 4G, 5G in other places. You know, you still have the economic, when you're looking at how many people can afford a VR headset for $300, you're still seeing there's a people who can afford it from a recreational and social perspective. But when you come to Africa, it's totally different. Am I going to buy $300? Am I going to buy a VR headset for $300, or I'm going to feed my family? But because I have a phone, I can still use my phone for recreational and social purposes. So I think we should challenge what's happening in the West and we start creating our own platforms, infrastructure, and content that can also now be able to be decentralized across Africa.
Yeah, I would add to this another thing. There is appropriation, and there is appropriation doesn't mean just like tap into the technology, but it means also the way technology is used. And we have seen in the global South since the emerging of internet that when a village or when a neighborhood doesn't have the individual power to buy something, usually that commodity gets collectivized. So it becomes a property of the collective. So you start to have cyber cafes. So I honestly, I don't think that this is the big issue, because the moment in which we will have a lot of interesting content that people would want to see, then knowing very well this continent, there's going to be like crazy VR small cinema into VR shags in the ghetto, and like, you know, people will have the latest Oculus whatever, and you just will have to pay maybe like a ticket of like $1 to watch that show. So I think, and forgive me if I say that, like the emphasis really needs to be on content that can motivate people and people can engage with, especially in the African big continent, because I think when that, without going into commercial, you know, if there's gonna be like VR headset and you can watch Arsenal against Liverpool in Nairobi, do you think people will not find a way to watch it in a VR headset, Brian? They will. They will, because you know, when they are pushed by real motivation, they will. So that's my opinion.
This is such an important conversation, and I hate to cut it off, but hopefully this is just the beginning, and we can continue to talk within our lab and the MIT community and larger. So I do have to say, we have to end, but thank you so much, Brian and Vincenzo, for your work, for your presentation today. It's really inspiring and important, brings up many important issues. So thank you, and thank you to all of you for watching and to our panelists, and we hope to see you next week. And for now, goodbye.